Well, good morning, good afternoon. How are you guys doing? This is Dr. Carmen Bryan, and this is Car Chronicles. You guys ready? Let's do this. Okay, so yesterday I did a video on the physiological reactions of trauma. Those of you that are in narcissist relationships or coming out, some physiological reactions that you may not have thought about. Some things, when we talk about your mind and your body is affected, that's psychologically and physiologically you are affected. So I wanted to do part 2 today. So let's review what we talked about yesterday. So we talked about the purpose of cortisol, which is a hormone that breaks down protein to make energy, to do energy. We also talked about how it affects the immune system and the reproductive system. We also talked about how the high levels of stress can give you tinnitus. How the sound is interpreted by the brain, and instead of by sound, it creates a ringing sound. We also talked about how blood pressure and blood sugar is affected by the high levels of stress and the increased level of cortisol. We talked about how during those high levels of stress and anxiety, your body's in that fight, flight, freeze and overproducing adrenaline and cortisol, and how the water is pulled out of your skin in order to be conserved in the body somewhere. So we were talking about dry skin, eczema, acne. So we were talking about how the skin is affected. What I didn't recall to mention also is that when the water is pulled out of the skin, not only do you get dry skin, for some people we said ashy, but it also causes problems with scarring. So what happens is that normally, the skin heals pretty fast, but when that water is drawn out, because you're on high levels of stress, it also causes scarring. So it's easy scarring, where scars don't heal that quickly. We also talked about sleep issues and chronic fatigue. Not only chronic fatigue, but how the body needs to replenish itself, to regenerate itself in the sleep, and muscle tension and muscle pain, and inability to be able to, like when you're working out, build muscle. You're having problems with building muscle. We also talked about the weight gain, that high anxiety, that super production, overproduction of cortisol, and weight gain. And there are 4 times more cortisol receptors in the stomach than there is in all the fat cells in the body. And so you got that big belly, but you also may look bloated. Instead of just big, you look bloated. Excessive eating and cravings for sugar. Problems with digestive system, or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux, and things like that. The decreased blood flow to the hands and the feet. So you find yourself having icy hands and icy feet. So let's add this. People that deal with complex PTSD or PTSD, it changes the way you breathe and it changes the way you sweat. Obviously anxiety has an effect on your breathing, but it affects the way you breathe, and it affects the way you sweat. So that nervous sweating. Some of you have that nervous sweating. I remember when I was in the military, when I was on funeral detail, we used to go to funerals. I don't do dead bodies. I don't like to be around dead bodies. When we did funerals, I think it was only one time they had an open casket, I made sure that I did not go in the room because they wanted me to come and look at the body. So I let the soldiers go in there, but I don't do dead bodies. So I don't look at dead bodies. It causes me to break into a cold sweat. And when we were in the room having to change, the coffin was sitting in that room, and I was in the other room changing clothes, and I didn't even know it, but I broke out in a cold sweat. And so that's that nervous sweating. So your body adjusts because of that anxiety, the rise of anxiety or chronic anxiety, where you're sweating, your breathing changes. So now think about it. So now PTSD or complex PTSD, that high levels of stress has affected the way that your body regulates heat. And so your body begins to overheat. You're having those cold sweats or those nervous sweating. Your brain is trying to regulate because your brain is getting hot. So guess what happens? You notice people have excessive yawning. Now, for some people, you're tired. I understand that. But for some people, they have that excessive yawning. Well, the yawning is the indicator that the brain is trying to cool itself down. And so when you take those deep breaths, the brain is cooling down. So that's why, a lot of therapists, they teach you about breathing strategies or breathing techniques to calm yourself back down, because not only are you getting air and oxygen to the brain, for those of you that body is dysregulated and your body is overheating and your brain is overheating, you notice that people will start yawning, or you notice that you yawn more often when you're at high levels of stress. And you're like, man, I'm just so tired. Now, some people are fatigued. And then for some people that excessive yawning thing is because the brain is trying to cool down. So you find yourself yawning a lot. So we know that our immune systems are affected when you go through high levels of stress and anxiety and PTSD and complex PTSD. And so your immune system is affected. And when your immune system is affected, you may have a lot of inflammation, because remember, that the 60% of your immune system is in your gut. Is in your gut area, your stomach area. And so when you have those high levels of stress and you have all that inflammation, you may notice that your allergies start flaring up. You start noticing you're having more allergies than normal. You have, because your immune system is supposed to keep out the pathogens and the bacteria from your body. But as your immune system is breaking down because those high levels of stress, you notice yourself having more allergies, or you're finding out that you have new allergies that you didn't know you had in the first place, or you have new allergies that you didn't, you get tested and like, I've never been allergic to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Ohio State did a research, and they found that the increase of cortisol, they noticed with the increase of cortisol, there was an increase of allergies. And so there was a correlation between the increase of the cortisol and the increase of allergies. Another thing to take in perspective is when they've found a connection between PTSD and increase in pain or nerve pain in the spine as well. And so you have to remember that when there's an increase of anxiety, when there's an increase of cortisol, and your immune system is being affected, you have inflammation in your body, you notice for some people you have chronic lower back pain. And so they correlated the two with PTSD, chronic stress, chronic stress, trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD, and an increase on lower back pain, and also an increase on nerve pain, chronic nerve pain in your spinal column. And so you see just how much your body is affected by the trauma, the stress, the PTSD, you see how these two are correlated. You see how your mental health and your physiological health is affected by someone who is abusive. All narcissists are malignant, but when we define malignant narcissist, a lot of times we're talking about one that also has another diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, dual diagnosis. But all of them are malignant, and all of them have a major effect on your body. And so you look at people that have been abused, misused, mistreated, and are suffering, from years and years of abuse, even starting from childhood, and they're in these terrible relationships or situationships where they have gotten to a point of that learned helplessness where they feel like there is no escape, and yet you're watching their health decline. I remember having a conversation with a client long time ago that was in the medical field and got breast cancer. And what the client was saying is that the oncologist that she worked with her that did the double mastectomy told her, because he was also a research oncologist, and said, this is off the records, but I'm gonna let you know that there is no cancer in your family. She had no history of family cancer, none of that. And he said, do you understand that when you are under chronic stress, chronic and traumatized on a daily basis, she was and was misdiagnosed with ADHD, doesn't have ADHD, had complex PTSD, and so they look very similar. And so they diagnosed her with bipolar, then ADHD, and really what it was chronic CPTSD. And the oncologist said, off the record, I'm going to just tell you this. And he said, of course, what I'm going to say will always be challenged, but because of the fact that you live in chronic stress, chronic domestic violence, chronic your anxiety levels are so high, he says your immune system can't even fight cancerous cells, and your immune system is supposed to be able to fight cancer, but because of the fact that you are under this amount of stress, I guarantee you that is why you develop cancer when it's not even in your family. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want you really to consider the situation that you are in. Instead of trying to figure out how to stay in it and try to make it work, you got to try to figure out how to get out of it. And I always put this disclaimer: you can't just jump up and leave with your kids, because they'll say that you kidnapped the children. So get an advocate involved and try to find your escape route. You can do it. Yes, you can. You have the ability to do it and sustain yourself.